It was wonderful, that's right. Thank you, Janice Guevara. It's a thrill to behold you beholding us. Harper Lee speaks through Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, saying, the one thing that doesn't abide by a majority rule is a man's conscience. One more time, the one thing that doesn't abide by a majority rule is a man's conscience. And this speaks to me powerfully in a couple of different ways. The first is that it points to the idea that public opinion doesn't change itself. That it's through individuals, often strong-minded, passionate individuals, willing to, in a sense, sacrifice their sense of self for a greater principle or idea in order to change public opinion. Public opinion often is an expression of the group consciousness that we sometimes only really get in touch with when we watch the news and we see where we may be in dismay about what public opinion has allowed to lapse. Be it discrimination taking place in our society, or environmental abuses, or political buffoonery, or whatever it may be. It takes strong individuals who are dedicated to particular principles, who will dedicate their lives to one idea to make a big difference. We think of some of those larger-than-life figures, someone like Gandhi, who dedicated himself to truth. King, who dedicated himself, we might say, to brotherhood. To Jesus, who dedicated himself to love and to forgiveness. And yet, examples of people who give themselves to greater principles are happening all the time. They're everyday events. A Good Samaritan who risks their own life in order to live in integrity, to celebrate and honor the dignity of life, to try and save someone else's. Someone who picks up a protest sign in a fascist regime somewhere in the world, risking their own lives in order to try and preserve in some way freedom for their child, even if they won't receive it themselves. Or someone who dons and takes on the uniform of their government in order to fight or try to preserve freedom. It happens all the time. Individuals who give themselves to one thing, freedom, liberty, love, honesty, whatever it may be, and it can really transform the world. It's a real powerful thing. I was really honored yesterday to get to preside over the wedding of Bill Wolf and Dean. Why don't you two stand up again? Yeah. Because we love you. And I'm very proud. A little creepy to think that just a couple years ago I couldn't do that legally. It's kind of an icky feeling. And it reminded me, I was just thinking about him, yesterday, someone like Ted Olson, who was a conservative attorney, very well known in conservative circles, who kind of took up the cause to fight Prop 8 in California and take it to the Supreme Court, based upon this idea of the importance of anyone getting to get married as a fundamental right, no matter who they are. And so there were conservatives that were upset with Olson about this. There were liberals and even gays and lesbians who were fighting for marriage rights, who were upset with him too, saying, you're going too fast, you're doing too much. But Olson disagreed. He wrote an article in Newsweek to explain what he was attempting to do. He said, Americans who believe in the words of the Declaration of Independence and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and the 14th Amendment, and in the Constitution's guarantees of equal protection and equal dignity before the law, cannot sit by while this wrong continues. This is not a conservative or liberal issue. It is an American one, and it is time that we, as Americans, embraced it. And it's a powerful idea when we give ourselves to a greater idea, because it can transform and it can create an environment where we could celebrate people in our community who not only enrich themselves in their lives, but enrich my relationship and enrich all of our relationships. And we're so grateful to be able to do something like that in this church that honors each and every one of us and how we choose to engage in relationships. Yeah. The other place where I find Lee's words about the importance of the conscience of an individual is when it comes to the power of our own selves. Do we have any idea just how creative and powerful and amazing the very fact of our own existence is? Not just in what we can do in the world, but just in the very fact of being alive. We are powerful beings. Remember, as Dr. Seuss put it, he said, you have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. Isn't that amazing? You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know. And you are the one who will decide where to go. We should not feel overbearing with the weight of choosing our own direction, because the way that we choose that direction to go has an impact. It makes a difference. It's so often in our life that we devalue ourselves. One of the ways we fall into that trap is we start valuing ourselves as all sorts of things around us. I'll say, that's my car. This is my job. This is just me. You know, the self won't be so important. This is just Josh on the phone, little old me. We'll diminish ourselves, and we'll try to build ourselves up in things around us and the externals, forgetting that they're directly related to what we're able to accomplish in the internal aspects of our being. There's an ancient story about a king who's struggling with his kingdom. It seems to be falling apart, so he calls in the local philosopher for some advice. And the philosopher can see quite plainly that the king's very attached to the material good going on in the kingdom. And he says, King, you are like a fountain, and your kingdom is like the streams of a fountain. When the fountain is pure, all of the streams have the ability to maintain that purity. But if the fountain is polluted, all of the streams will become polluted as well. And I kind of think that's true in our own lives as well. We are like fountains. And when we in ourselves and our spirits are pure, when we know who we are, when we give ourselves to those principles and ideals that we most value, the streams of our life contain that purity and that wealth and that enrichment as well. When we're polluted with toxic ideas about who we are or who we aren't, in self-judgment, in lack of acceptance of self, the streams around us begin to reveal that as well. It shows up as cracks in our work, or in our relationship, or in how we interact with others. It's our responsibility to go back to our own source and to recognize that we are not the result of externals, but it is through our internal realization that we can participate in the creation of what takes place around us. This is a massive idea, yet a very important one that we should be willing to take responsibility of. I love it when I can ask someone how they are and they can say something to the extent of, Josh, things are really tough right now, but I'm doing okay. Or things are hard, but it's funny, I'm great. Have you ever had that dichotomy? It means that the person's consciousness has gotten larger to the degree that it possesses their affairs as opposed to their affairs possessing their consciousness and pulling them around. It means that no matter what is taking place in my life, I can be connected with the source of who I am, and I can know that that's a good thing. And therefore I have greater influence over how I interact and relate with what's around me. The king in the story struggled with the philosopher's analogy. He said, can you explain a little further? And the philosopher said, okay, imagine that you're in a desert and you're dying of thirst, and someone offers you a glass of water. But in exchange for that glass of water, they want half your kingdom. Do you accept it? Yes, I suppose so, the king says. Well, suppose a little later on you're still lost. You can see your kingdom on the horizon. You're almost home, but you're dying of thirst again. You need another drink, and there's another man who appears, and he offers you a glass of water, but he wants the other half of your kingdom. Do you give it to him? Yes, I will for my own life, the king says. Well, why, king, is it that you are so invested in that which is only worth a glass of water? Why do you forget the value of your own self, of who you are? And we share the story not to say that the aspects of the streams in the kingdom are unimportant. They're incredibly valuable, but we must always remember their source. They may not be as valuable if we're not participating in them. It's that consciousness, it's that aspect, that truth of who we are that brings us and brings our relationships, our work, and everything we do to life. Do you remember the movie City Slickers?
Oh, yes.
And there's Curly, played by Jack Palance, and then there's Mitch, played by Billy Crystal. And probably the most famous scene in the movie has to do with the calf being birthed, but I think it happens just before then. The two of them are on their horses. And Curly holds up a finger and he says, "Do you know what the secret of life is?" And Mitch says, "Your finger?" And Curly doesn't listen at all. He says, "One thing, just one thing. You stick to that and the rest don't mean S-H-I-T." He doesn't say it that way. He says it the other way in the movie. But what is the one thing, Mitch asks him? That's what you have to find out. And I love the invitation for uniqueness there, because no one else can tell you what your one thing is. We have to look within ourselves to discover what that quality or principle or idea is that we are living our whole life in accordance with. I would argue we all have one, but some of us know what it is and live in accordance with it more clearly, and some of us get lost from it, and so it calls us back to itself through difficulties and challenges and all, oh my, all the stuff that comes with that. It's a name of God implanted within ourselves. It's the calling of our soul. For some, they call it love. For some, they call it integrity. For some, they call it fun. Words in the English language don't quite give it justice. We may want to create our own word for it, but it's a feeling. It's something truly real and there. And when we live in accordance with it, it guides us. And we don't need to get distracted in anything else. Stephen Covey famously says in his 7 Habits, he says, the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. One more time, the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. In other words, in a practical way, don't waste your time investing in anything else other than what you perceive to be your highest good and for the highest good of those around you. So what is your one thing? What is that thing that you're invested in? That principle that you live by? Anybody? We'll throw it out to you a couple times. Yes, Michelle, journeying. I like that. Family, Ryan. Kindness. Acceptance. Thanks, Marcia. Reverend. Sense of humor. Love. Chris. Giving. Good. Great. Great answers. Yes. Grace. Excellent. We've been, our leadership council, all this year, we've been reading the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, which talks about the idea of what makes a good company turn into a great company. And one of the things that he talks about in the book is what's called the hedgehog concept, which, to simplify it, means that something that the great companies do is they're really aware of that one thing that they do best, and they focus in on that and stop wasting time on anything else. They get this term, the hedgehog concept, from an old Greek proverb. The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. Collins explains ideas based on the author Isaiah Berlin. Foxes pursue many ends at a time and see the world in all its complexity. They are scattered and diffused, moving on many levels, never integrating their thinking into one overall concept on unifying vision. Hedgehogs, on the other hand, simplify a complex world into a single organizing idea, a basic principle or concept that unifies and guides everything. So the idea Collins explains is that the hedgehog's not slow, They just know what their priority is. And that relates to our lives too. Are you one of those folks that wants to be all things to all people? To get all things done all the time for everything? Or can you really just focus in on what that one thing is that matters most to you and be the best at it? It's a big help when I no longer want to be the fixer of everyone's problems, but to be a presence of love and support no matter what for them. Not only does it take a lot of weight off my shoulders, but it accomplishes a whole lot more too. We can prioritize ourselves in such a way that can allow that to take place. I know for me, in my life, I would have to say that the one thing that I do that's more important than anything else is to listen. That's the most essential thing to me, because that's just what I do. Listen to people one-on-one. I listen to the divine. I listen to my intuition. I listen to books that I read, to movies I watch. Everything I do is based on listening. And how do I show up to do it? That's where the uniqueness comes in as a minister. I want to be a presence of love and support. So a minister at this church, or hopefully in my personal life, is a loving and supportive presence. And then everything else ensues. Everything ensues. Every success, every accomplishment, every failure sometimes too, is based upon my ability to do that one thing. And I know that I'm off balance in my life. I know that I'm losing track when I stop listening, when I've gotten blocked up. And so you can know that in relationship to your one thing. When you move away from it, it's going to call you back, and it's going to be challenging sometimes to get back there. So we want to stay integrated and at one with that one thing that is most important to us. One of my favorite examples of living based upon one thing in a book or a movie is The Godfather. And Don Corleone is one of my favorite characters. And he has a one thing. It's very clear. The movie's all about it, and it's family. That's his one thing. And Mario Puzo in the books, he says a line that if you're a fan of any of the films, you can see that the whole thing's about this statement right here. The strength of a family, like the strength of an army, lies in its loyalty to each other. And the unique way that Don Corleone shows up is as the Godfather, right? So that's where all the entertainment comes in, and make him an offer he can't refuse and all that type of stuff. That's where we get the fun of the story, but really we have this story of family. The one thing that you follow, that principle, may not always produce things as you think that they ought to look, but if you follow it, the faith that we are called to have is that will produce something equal or even better than what we can imagine. Jack Palance won an Oscar that year for playing Curly, and he was pretty famous for it because he did the one-armed push-ups. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And what some people don't remember about the speech is he speaks a little bit to the idea of the one thing. He talks about starting his acting career. He was an immigrant from another country, and he started working on a film, and it was his first acting gig, and he was really enjoying it, and the director came up to him and he said, "You know what, Jack, you're doing a great job. You're going to win the Oscar." 42 years later, Palance says the SOB was right. Gary Keller, a real estate mogul who has a bestseller called The One Thing that came out recently, says, "Success demands the singleness of purpose." So again, like I was saying earlier, I think we do all have a one thing. We all have a guiding principle. And it's our responsibility to become aware of what that is, whether we have a clear name for it or not, and to be able to create and measure where we are in accordance with that. So I'm going to throw that out one more time. We had a lot of great answers, but anyone else want to say what their one thing is? Prosperity. Good. I felt bad I didn't get to call on you earlier. So anybody else? Service. Michael.
I've got everything else in wait for our search for God. Yeah.
Hey, great. Excellent. Love. Yes. So then there's that thing that you do, and then there's how you show up to do it. And that's what we're called, I think, to give awareness to as well. So just in prayerfully closing today, I just invite you to take a deep breath with me if you so choose. To invite us, in a sense, as Janice did earlier today, to spend some time in that garden of our soul, that garden of our inward space, to be aware of the seeds that we are planting, of the type of gardener that we're going to be. Are we nurturing seeds of self-disgust, of uncertainty, of stories turning out in a way that is dramatic or unknown to us? Or are we nurturing those seeds of certainty in alignment with our soul's deepest passion and calling? Are we choosing to live in a world not where we question, why am I here, but where we say to ourselves, I am here, this is what I'm going to do about it? Let us respond to each situation that comes to life, not with despair, but with our highest values, our highest virtues, our highest ideals, knowing there is nothing more creative ever in any society than to do just this. Making that commitment to ourselves, we are indeed the best possible keeper of our soul. And so it is. Amen. So thanks for your time, everyone, this morning.